Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we sift through sources, research, notes, all sorts of material to really get to the heart of a subject for you. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely informed, maybe with a few surprises along the way.
And hopefully a bit engaging, too.
Exactly. Today, we're diving deep into someone you might know mainly as a background figure to King David, but who was absolutely central to ancient Israel's story. His name is Joab.
Ah, Joab. Yes, a fascinating figure.
He really is a man of, well, huge contradictions. He was this military genius, incredibly loyal in some ways, but also, a startlingly cold-blooded killer. Driven by vengeance, ruthless pragmatism. It's quite the mix.
It absolutely is. Joab is one of the most, let's be honest, enigmatic and controversial figures in the whole biblical story of Israel. David definitely casts a long shadow, but you really can't grasp David's reign, his rise, his struggles, his whole legacy without understanding Joab.
He's that important.
Oh, definitely. He was an extraordinary warrior, maybe the best they had, a brilliant tactician. His life, his destiny was just deeply, maybe even dangerously, tangled up with David's throne. His story is this challenging tapestry. You've got threads of military brilliance and unwavering devotion on one side.
That's that.
But then you have shocking, unrepented bloodshed and just stark insubordination on the other. He really embodies this profound paradox.
And that paradox, that tension, that's what makes him so compelling, right?
Yeah.
And that's our mission today for you listening. To really impact Joab, we're going to dig into who he was, his family, because blood runs thick and often violently in his story, as we'll see.
Oh, it certainly does.
We'll look at that intense, sometimes explosive relationship he had with King David, yes, including his, frankly, chilling role in the whole Bathsheba affair.
Dark chapter.
Definitely. And we'll tackle that big question, his spiritual state. Was he really a warrior for God, or was he mainly out for himself, serving his own ambitions? And finally, we'll look at how it all ended for him, which was pretty dramatic.
It was indeed.
We've got a lot of sources pulled together for this, and I think you'll find some surprising, maybe unsettling insights into this man who was so essential to David's kingdom, yet just full of these deep contradictions. So let's dive in. Let's start at the beginning. Who exactly was Joab?
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out right away is that Joab wasn't just some soldier who worked his way up. Not at all. He had this really unique position right inside David's inner circle from early on.
How so?
Well, the scriptures consistently call him the son of Zeruiah. And that name, Zeruiah, is crucial. We find out in 1 Chronicles 2.1c that she was David's sister.
His sister. So Joab was David's nephew.
Exactly, by blood, right there in the royal family. And this wasn't just, a nice family connection. It was this bond of kinship that often seemed to go way beyond the usual commander-king dynamic. It gave him incredible access, incredible influence.
So he wasn't just taking orders.
Far from it. He was often involved in shaping strategy, in the loop on secrets and plans others wouldn't know. He was family.
And his official role was pretty significant too, right? Not just the nephew.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't just hanging around court. He was the chief commander of Israel's army. That position put him right at the center of pretty much every major event during David's very long, often very chaotic reign. You see him constantly in 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 Kings 1 and 2 Chronicles. He's this formidable presence.
Always there.
Right. On
the battlefield, leading campaigns or navigating the tricky politics of the court.
Exactly. Pulling strings, making things happen. His role was, I'd say, more than pivotal, maybe second only to David himself in terms of the actual practical impact on building and sustaining the kingdom. 2 Samuel 8.16 makes that clear. Joab was effectively the indispensable architect.
Architect. That's a strong word.
I think it fits. He didn't just win battles. He built and sustained the Davidic kingdom as it was forming. His military skill wasn't for minor skirmishes. We're talking grand campaigns, securing huge territories, consolidating David's political power across the whole region. He had this incredible strategic mind logistics, troop movements, siege warfare. He just got it.
So his actions weren't just side notes in David's story.
Not at all. They directly shaped everything, from fighting major enemies like the Philistines, Ammonites, Syrians, to handling those incredibly tense, often bloody internal power struggles that marked David's rule. You just can't tell David's story. You can't understand how Israel became this powerful nation under him without Joab right at the center. He was the king's Sorum, the strategic muscle, the force that made David's vision happen.
Okay, so that's the resume. Impressive. But beyond the titles and the victories, what about the man himself? What were his core traits, his character?
Well, you absolutely have to start with courage. undeniably courageous. You didn't lead from the front in that era without it. He was right there in the thick of it.
Makes sense.
He was also incredibly cunning, always thinking steps ahead, anticipating the enemy, exploiting weaknesses, and fiercely loyal to David. Now, this loyalty...
But there's a catch, right?
There's always a catch with Joab. This loyalty, despite all their clashes, was fundamental in one sense. He would never betray David to an outside enemy. He was committed to the stability of David's throne, to the kingdom itself.
Okay, so loyalty to the kingdom, maybe more than the man sometimes.
Yeah.
But you hinted it wasn't always, let's say, noble loyalty.
Exactly. It was often incredibly pragmatic, almost chillingly so. Many sources call him a man of the sword. His whole being seems defined by this ruthless political expediency. For Joab, the main goal was getting the job done militarily, securing Israel, protecting David's throne.
Consequences be damned.
Often, yeah. He wasn't overly worried about the moral niceties or the ethical purity of his actions. It was about the outcome. For Joab, the end often justified the means, no matter how brutal. He was about results, sometimes seemingly disregarding the human cost.
And that results-driven approach, that pragmatism, that connects to another key part of his character, doesn't it? His independence.
Oh, absolutely. And this is fascinating and often frustrating for David, I imagine. His fierce independence bordered on and frequently crossed right over into outright insubordination. He was never just a yes man.
He pushed back.
Pushed back, went around, sometimes just did his own thing. Again and again, he took matters into his own hands, even directly contradicting David's explicit wishes. It paints this incredibly complex, sometimes volatile picture of their relationship, this constant tension between royal authority and military autonomy.
Which brings us to that famous line from David. It just captures that tension perfectly, that frustration. In 2 Samuel 3, after Joab does something particularly awful and unauthorized, David cries out, "These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too hard for me."
Too hard for me, yeah.
Just think about that phrase. From a king, what does that tell you? It reveals Joab's sheer force of will, his defiance, but also David's profound frustration, his inability sometimes to fully control his own top general.
It really speaks volumes about the power dynamics, doesn't it? It points to Joab's immense power, his tendency to operate outside direct command, doing what he thought was necessary for the kingdom, or maybe for himself, even if it made a moral or political mess for David.
It suggests David was, in some ways, totally reliant on him.
Absolutely reliant.
But also maybe kind of trapped by him. This incredibly powerful, unyielding general. It's a strange balance.
It really is. That phrase, too hard for me, it just sticks with you. Like the king couldn't quite tame the very forces he needed to build his kingdom. So, okay, let's dig into where Joab came from, because his family, especially his brothers, they were huge influences.
Right, the sons of Zeruiah. You mentioned that name earlier. Zeruiah, David's sister. And the Bible consistently calls Joab son of Zeruiah, not son of his father. That is unusual in that kind of society, isn't it?
It's incredibly significant. Normally, in those detailed biblical genealogies, especially for someone this prominent, you get the father's name. Always. The fact that they consistently identify him through his mother strongly suggests Zeruiah herself was a major figure.
A strong woman.
A matriarch.
Possibly. Someone of considerable influence, maybe strength. Or it could mean his father died early, leaving Zeruiah as the dominant force raising these formidable warrior sons.
Either way, it emphasizes that connection to David's family.
Exactly. It roots Joab and his brothers firmly in David's extended royal family. That deep kinship made their loyalty, their actions, their betrayals way more impactful. These weren't just social ties. They were strategic, deeply personal.
And Joab wasn't alone. He had brothers, also warriors.
Oh, yes. Part of a powerful trio. Two brothers, Abishai and Asahel. Both serious warriors themselves. Part of David's elite mighty men mentioned in 1 Chronicles 2.1 here. They were this tight-knit, fiercely loyal warrior family unit around David, a real force.
A band of brothers, literally. Let's look at them. Abishai, he was the eldest. He was known for incredible bravery, unwavering loyalty to David. There's that amazing story in 2 Samuel 21 where he saves David's life from a Philistine giant, Ishbi-Benob, just charges in, pure courage, saves the king.
Wow. He sounds like Joab in some ways.
He does. Often served as Joab's right-hand man, his second in command. Shared that pragmatic, no-nonsense approach. He even went with David on that risky mission into Saul's camp, ready to kill Saul right there if David hadn't stopped him.
But maybe slightly different from Joab.
Seems like it. Abishai, despite his ferocity, appeared less likely to act completely independently or defy David's direct orders, unlike Joab. He was loyal, fiercely loyal, but maybe more willing to follow the king's commands to the letter. More controlled, perhaps?
Okay, so Abishai, the loyal warrior. Then there was Asahel, the youngest.
Asahel, his defining trait was just incredible speed, almost supernatural. 2 Samuel 2.18 calls him as fleet of foot as a wild gazelle, or swift as a wild roe.
Like a sprinter on the battlefield.
Exactly. Think about that in ancient combat. He could chase down enemies like nobody else. A rare, highly valued skill. Imagine the impact.
But that speed, it led to tragedy, didn't it? An event that really echoes through Joab's life.
It absolutely did. And this brings us to one of the most pivotal moments, something that would deeply scar Joab and shape his future actions. Asahel's death. This wasn't just another casualty. For Joab, it lit a fire, a personal vendetta.
What happened exactly?
It was during that brutal civil war, David's forces against those loyal to Saul's son, Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth's army was led by Abner, Saul's former general, a very cunning, experienced warrior.
Okay, tensions are high.
Extremely high. And the details from 2 Samuel 2 are crucial to understanding Joab's later obsession with revenge. Asahel, using his incredible speed, maybe seeing a chance for glory, relentlessly chased Abner.
Targeting the enemy general.
Right. But Abner, surprisingly, didn't want to kill him. He saw the potential for a blood feud, more revenge killings. He actually warned Asahel repeatedly, turn back, go fight someone else, don't make me do this.
But Asahel didn't listen.
He wouldn't stop. Too proud, too focused, too impetuous maybe. He kept closing in. It forced Abner's hand. In self-defense, as Asahel caught up, Abner used the butt end of his spear, a backward thrust, a precise defensive move, and killed Asahel instantly.
Self-defense, arguably. An accident of war.
You could see it that way, but for Joab, his older brother, no way was it an accident. It was a devastating personal loss, an unthinkable injustice. It cut him to the core.
And ignited that desire for vengeance you mentioned.
A burning, unquenchable desire. It would fester and lead directly to one of his most infamous cold-blooded acts later on. Asahel's death didn't just mark him, it scarred him, shaped his character, influenced his decisions for years. From that moment, for Joab, things often became intensely personal.
Which leads us perfectly into the heart of Joab's story. Had the incredibly complex, often really disturbing relationship with King David. It's this mix of loyalty, independence, disobedience, even complicity in David's darkest moments. But first, we have to acknowledge Joab's massive value to David.
Absolutely. You can't understand the conflicts without first seeing how indispensable he was. He was arguably David's most effective general ever. The force that solidified and dramatically expanded the kingdom turned a fledgling kingship into a regional power.
His military brilliance was key. You mentioned Jerusalem earlier.
Yes, that capture was pure Joab. Leading the charge, decisive action. 1 Chronicles 11 even says David offered the top command spot to whoever led the assault. Joab seized it. That wasn't just winning a battle, it was a strategic masterstroke, a neutral central capital genius.
Then he fought major wars too.
Critical ones, defeating huge threats like the Ammonites, Syrians, Edomites, Philistines, Arameans. We see this in 2 Samuel 10 and elsewhere. These weren't minor border fights. These secured Israel's borders, allowed for expansion. And then think about Absalom's rebellion.
A huge crisis for David.
Huge. And it was Joab who cleverly and ruthlessly managed that civil war, made incredibly hard choices that, despite the immense personal cost to David, ultimately saved David's throne. David absolutely relied on him for stability, for security. He knew Joab delivered.
And Joab knew it too, right? That gave him leverage.
Immense leverage. Joab was shrewd. He understood his own indispensability.
But that leverage, that indispensability, it came with a massive catch, didn't it? And that's where things get so difficult. His methods clashed with David's conscience, maybe.
Constantly. It led to major conflicts, outright disobedience, betrayals. These weren't small disagreements. They shook the kingdom.
Okay, let's look at those conflicts. The murder of Abner seems like a key example.
It's incredibly revealing. This is in 2 Samuel 3. Context is everything. David was actively trying to make peace with Abner. Abner had defected from Ishbosheth's side and was key to uniting the northern tribes under David. A huge political win was within grasp.
Peace was finally possible.
Exactly. But Joab saw an opportunity. For revenge for Asahel, yes, but also cold, calculated political elimination. He didn't want competition. Abner was a respected general who could easily challenge Joab's top spot.
So both personal vengeance and political ambition.
A toxic mix. So what does Joab do? He ambushes Abner, murders him in Hebron, a supposed sanctuary city, lures him there under false pretenses, pretending to want a private word.
A huge betrayal of David's strategy, David's trust. How did David react?
Publicly. He was devastated, furious, but also politically trapped. He mourned Abner dramatically, called it a grievous sin, stated clearly the blood guilt was on Joab alone, and that's when he said it. I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too hard for me.
There it is again. Too hard for me. The king admitting he can't control his own general.
It's stunning, isn't it? Joab's actions nearly shattered the fragile peace, threatened to restart the civil war. David had to publicly disown the act, but he couldn't actually remove Joab without risking chaos. He needed him, that unresolved tension, to find their relationship going forward.
And this pattern, Joab taking matters into his own hands, ignoring David, it just kept happening, even more dramatically during Absalom's rebellion.
Absolutely. The second major conflict, maybe the most heartbreaking, is the murder of Absalom in 2 Samuel 18. David's command, given with a father's broken heart, was crystal clear. Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. He wanted his son saved, despite the rebellion.
A father's plea.
But Joab, cold, tactical mind, he saw Absalom alive as an ongoing threat to the kingdom's stability. As long as Absalom lived, the rebellion could reignite. So he prioritized political necessity, kingdom security, over David's parental emotion.
So he ignored the order.
Completely. He personally led the charge, found Absalom tangled in that tree, and thrust 3 javelins into Absalom's heart himself, made sure he was dead.
Unbelievable defiance. And then, didn't he confront David about his grief afterwards?
Even more audacious. He didn't just kill Absalom. He then marched right into David's tent and basically chewed him out for grieving too much. This is in 2 Samuel 19.
He told David off for grieving his own son.
He did. He told David his mourning was demoralizing the troops who'd just saved his throne, said straight up, "You have shamed all your servants today. I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then you would be pleased."
Wow. That's brutal.
Brutal. It perfectly captures Joab's ruthless strategy, overriding David's feelings, choosing the kingdom over the king's heart. It shows the immense power Joab wielded, daring to lecture the king like that. Loyalty to the throne, trumping loyalty to the man.
And it seems like Joab made a habit of removing rivals, anyone David might favor.
You're spot on. The third incident, the murder of Amasa in 2 Samuel 20, fits the pattern perfectly. Amasa was another nephew of David's. Crucially, David had appointed Amasa as his general, intending to replace Joab after the Absalom incident.
So a direct threat to Joab's position.
A huge threat and a massive insult. Joab's motive,
Right.
clear as day, eliminate the rival, reassert his absolute control over the army. He meets Amasa, pretends to greet him warmly, goes in for an embrace.
And then
Stabs him brutally with a sword. Spills his guts right there. A chilling betrayal, a public show of force. It cemented the pattern. Joab eliminates threats to his power with calculated treachery, even if David appointed them.
so loyal, yet so disobedient and treacherous, it's bewildering. But then there's that moment with the census, which seems different, where he actually pushes back against David on what seems like moral grounds.
It is different, and it's one of the most intriguing moments for Joab. 2 Samuel 24, 1 Chronicles 21. David commands Joab to take a census of Israel. What's unique is Joab's immediate strong objection. This isn't just about logistics. Joab expresses this unusual, almost spiritual concern.
What did he say?
1 Chronicles 21 quotes him, "May the Lord add to his people 100 times more than they are. But, my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then does my lord require this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt in Israel?"
Wait, Joab said that? The guy who murdered Abner and Amasa? Suddenly he's worried about incurring guilt. Why? Was it genuine spiritual insight?
It seems like a fascinating mix. Maybe pragmatism, maybe a surprising flash of spiritual discernment. On one hand, Joab, maybe more than David right then, saw numbering the people without God's instruction as pride. David, measuring his strength in human terms, counting soldiers, not trusting God's power.
Like relying on the army instead of God.
Exactly. Joab seemed to sense this, crossed an invisible line, bringing guilt upon Israel. It wasn't a military necessity he could see. Its purpose, maybe vainglory or planning for taxes or conscription, felt spiritually risky. Joab, despite everything, maybe recognized a divine boundary David was crossing. He feared God's wrath more than the king's command in that moment.
So a fear of God that David himself seemed to miss. That's a striking reversal.
It is. And it wasn't just abstract. Joab knew the precedent. Israel was only numbered under God's direction, like in the book of Numbers. No divine instruction came here, so it violated protocol. Plus, pragmatically, a census was a massive disruptive undertaking, potentially unpopular. Joab, leading the army, would have to manage it, so multiple reasons.
But David insisted.
David's word prevailed against Joab, as Totamiel puts it. Joab obeyed, but clearly hated it. And significantly, he didn't do it fully. 1 Chronicles 21 says, Joab did not number Levi and Benjamin among them, for the king's word was abominable to Joab.
He left out whole tribes, a kind of passive resistance.
Exactly. Silent defiance. Fulfilling the letter, but subtly subverting the spirit. It took 9 months and 20 days. He reported the numbers, but the text repeats, the command was repulsive to him.
And was Joab right to be worried? What happened after?
His instincts were dead on. As soon as it was done, David's conscience was stricken. God sent a plague, killing 70,000 men. Horrifying.
Wow. So Joab saw it coming.
David admitted his sin, interceded, but the damage was done. It's this paradoxical moment where Joab, the brutal warrior, shows this rare moral clarity, discerns spiritual danger, speaks truth to power, even limits his obedience. A general who, just occasionally, feared God more than the king did.
Which brings us right back to that core question, the enigma of Joab, his spiritual condition. He fought for Israel, did incredible things for David's kingdom, but his actions, they so often clash with God's principles. So was he a warrior for God or mainly for himself?
It's the central puzzle, isn't it? The sources suggest he, maybe uncomfortably, did God's work without walking in God's ways.
That nails it. Like he was this necessary, maybe even brutal tool in God's plan for David's kingdom, but not really a righteous servant himself, not acting out of deep faith or fear of the Lord. The clashes are just too constant. Let's explore both sides. What's the case for Joab being, if not a direct warrior of God, at least someone used by God, or maybe showing flashes of understanding God's purpose?
Well, you can definitely argue he was an indispensable instrument for God's purposes, even if unintentionally. First, his fierce loyalty to David. David was God's anointed king, so Joab's commitment to David's throne, to the dynasty's stability, indirectly served God's long-term plan for Israel, for the Messiah's lineage. He helped build the house God intended.
Okay, enabling the divine plan, even with flawed motives.
Right. Second, his military victories. Crushing the Ammonites, capturing Jerusalem, future site of the temple. These advanced Israel's mission to possess the promised land, fulfilling God's promises. These weren't just political wins, they were steps towards Israel's destiny.
Makes sense. Any other point?
Third, you do get those rare flashes of faith or courage framed religiously. Like before that big battle in 2 Samuel 10, he tells his troops, "Be of good courage and let us play the men for our people and for the cities of our God." That suggests he recognized God's involvement, had some trust in divine sovereignty, even if his personal life didn't match.
Okay.
And finally, by crushing rebellions like Absalom's, he ensured stability for God's people, prevented civil war, preserved the Davidic line. So, in terms of practical outcomes for Israel, Joab was often working, maybe brutally, but in line with God's purposes, even if his heart wasn't right.
Okay, that's one side. But the other side feels equally strong, maybe stronger, painting a much darker picture of his motives.
Yeah.
What points most strongly to Joab being fundamentally a warrior for himself, driven by power, ambition, revenge?
Oh, this side is very compelling. First, and it's telling, Joab is never praised for spiritual devotion in the Bible, not like David, a man after God's own heart, a worshiper, a psalmist. Joab often seemed to disregard divine instruction, especially if it came via David's moral authority.
His actions spoke louder than any claim to faith.
Exactly. Second, his actions consistently seemed driven much more by raw political power, pragmatic loyalty to the king, his own ambition to stay top general, and that deep-seated vengeance for Asahel, spiritual discernment. Reverence for God rarely seems primary. Self-interest and brutal pragmatism almost always won out over God's law.
And those murders, Abner, Amasa, they really underscore that, don't they? Personal agenda overriding everything.
Absolutely. Done for undeniably personal reasons, revenge, job security, clear violations of God's command, you shall not murder. Third, his repeated audacious disobedience to royal orders, orders which often had divine backing. Killing Absalom against David's explicit command. Later, backing Adonijah's coup against God's chosen successor, Solomon. It shows Joab consistently prioritizing his own judgment, his own ambition, over God's anointed and God's plan.
And then there's his role in the Uriah affair. That connects him directly to David's worst sin. What does that tell us about his moral compass?
It tells us a lot, and none of it good. His deep complicity in Uriah's murder back in 2 Samuel 11. He was an accessory. It shows a stark willingness to compromise ethics, do morally reprehensible things for loyalty or power. Joab was the guy willing to get his hands dirty no matter how bloody, if it served the kingdom's stability, the king's reputation, or his own position. He was willing to do anything to serve the throne, protect the king's image.
And became entangled in David's sin himself.
Deeply entangled. Fifth, he seems to have had little personal regard for the Mosaic Law when it got in the way of military necessity or revenge. He was a ruthless pragmatist, a warrior, not a priest. He played by different rules. And finally, maybe most crucially, unlike David, who famously repented deeply, publicly, Psalm 51, his reaction in 2 Samuel 12, Joab, shows no remorse, no confession, no penance recorded anywhere for his violence.
No repentance at all.
None recorded. That suggests a profound lack of spiritual sensitivity, maybe even a hardened conscience. He just didn't seem to operate under the same moral framework as David.
So, putting it all together, how do we assess his spiritual condition? It's definitely not straightforward.
It remains this deep, uncomfortable paradox. God clearly used his military skill for Israel's benefit. He served David, ensured kingdom stability. But his actions consistently show primary loyalty to David's throne, to the practical, sometimes brutal needs of the earthly kingdom, not to the Lord himself or his moral law.
His faith, if he had it, was overshadowed.
Deeply overshadowed by his huge moral failings, his ruthless ambition, and that striking lack of repentance. He was ultimately, I think, mainly a warrior for himself and his earthly king, driven by his own agenda, using his amazing talents to keep influence and power, not truly submitting to God's law. He was necessary, formidable, yes. But he never seemed to share David's heart for God, never showed that brokenness, that repentance. It's a really cautionary tale, isn't it, for you listening?
It absolutely is. A powerful, chilling distinction. And it leads us right into the final act, Joab's downfall. A reminder that even the most indispensable figures face accountability eventually. In David's last days, Joab makes one last fatal political mistake.
Yes. Backing Adonijah. That was the final gamble, and it failed spectacularly. He knew perfectly well David had chosen Solomon. It's clear in 1 Kings 1, Solomon, Bathsheba's son, the product of the very sin Joab helped cover up, yet God's chosen heir.
But Joab backed the other guy.
Despite knowing David's choice, Joab makes the calculated decision to side with Adonijah, David's older son, who tried to grab the throne while David was old and weak. Pure politics. A cynical power play.
Why? What was his thinking?
He likely figured Solomon, a new king, maybe influenced by his mother Bathsheba, wouldn't keep him in charge of the army. So he backed the horse he thought he could control, Adonijah, hoping for continued service and influence. It was a massive betrayal of David's explicit will and, by extension, God's plan for the succession. He backed the wrong horse, right against God's providence.
And David, on his deathbed, didn't forget Joab's past. He gave Solomon specific instructions, didn't he?
Oh, he didn't forget. Not at all. In 1 Kings 2, David, basically with his last breath, tells Solomon, "Deal with Joab according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace."
Do not let him die peacefully. Wow.
It wasn't just bitterness. David specifically mentioned the blood kind. Joab was responsible for Abner, Amasa, implicitly Uriah, too. It was a dying wish for justice against the man who'd operated outside accountability for so long, protected only by his indispensability. David wanted Solomon to start his reign clean, based on justice, purging the stain of these unpunished acts. A clear mandate to deal with Joab.
So David dies, Solomon takes over. What happens to Joab? It sounds like the end is near.
The consequences were immediate and absolute. As Solomon consolidated power, dealt with rivals, Joab knew his time was up. He could feel it. In a desperate last move, he fled to the tabernacle and grabbed the horns of the altar, seeking sanctuary.
The traditional place of refuge.
Exactly. A desperate plea for mercy, for divine protection. This is in 1 Kings 2.28. But Solomon, remembering the murders, the defiance, the recent rebellion, flatly denied him sanctuary. Solomon declared Joab's blood guilt had to finally fall on his own head. The Lord will return his blood on his own head, Solomon said.
No sanctuary for Joab.
None. Solomon sent Benaiah, his new loyal commander, to execute Joab right there at the altar, fulfilling David's wish, signaling a new era, no more untouchable figures.
A dramatic end. At the altar itself, what's the significance of him dying right there?
It's incredibly significant. Joab died without honor. Despite everything he did for the kingdom, his plea for sanctuary was denied. His long, bloody past was finally judged. It was an act of both divine and royal justice. It fulfilled David's earlier curse that the blood Joab shed would fall on his own head. God's justice for unrepented bloodshed and defiance.
And it marked the end of an era.
Absolutely. The end of David's often chaotic reign, characterized by that raw pragmatism and the king's struggle to control his general. And it marked the decisive beginning of Solomon's rule, a chapter where unchecked military power, ruthless independence, unpunished killing, not tolerated anymore. A shift towards more ordered, centralized rule. The king's word was final. Justice, however brutal, would be served.
So wrapping this all up, Joab. What a figure. Incredibly complex, undeniably enigmatic, brilliant commander, loyal relative, essential architect of David's kingdom. All true.
All true, yet also a cold-blooded killer, a calculating political operator, a defiant general, and ultimately a rebel against God's chosen order and David's final will.
Exactly. Spiritually, you just don't see clear evidence of deep personal faith, genuine repentance, consistent fear of the Lord. His loyalty was to the throne, its practical needs, the mechanics of power, not necessarily God's will or moral law. He was used by God, absolutely.
Undeniably used.
But he never seemed to share David's heart for God, never showed that repentance, that brokenness over sin, lived by the sword, died by the sword, an unrepentant paradox right to the end.
Indeed. And that, for you listening, that's maybe the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? A cautionary tale. Joab's life is this stark reminder. Even people who do great things for God's leaders, even those essential to a divine plan, can operate outside God's perfect will. And they face accountability for their own choices, their methods, their unrepented sins, being used by God.
Which Joab clearly was.
It's just not the same thing as being approved by God.
That's a powerful and frankly uncomfortable distinction. And it leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? What does Joab's story really teach you about that deep, often uncomfortable tension between human loyalty to a person, a cause, a kingdom, and divine righteousness? And how does unchecked ambition, even when it seems to serve a great